Welcome back to the Sweepstakes College Baseball Podcast, where today we're going to be going through our top 2024 players position by position, and then at the end of it, do a top 10 of all the positions combined. But before we get into that, we're going to do a little update on what's going on in the world of college baseball. Just some Twitter, or I guess X, news that dropped pretty recently over the past week. Just give a little update prior to getting into the rankings. First off, it seems like Jim Schlossnagle, the coach of Texas A&M, has a little bit of beef with Taylor Swift. He does not like that she gets about 5 seconds of airtime per Chiefs game, and that came to fruition when he posted about it on Twitter. But he loves his tweets. He was also retweeting something that Jameis said a while back about how high school athletes should be doing multiple sports. So he's all over it. I love to see the action all over the place, but it's kind of funny his takes here and there, especially with Taylor Swift. I know a lot of older folks don't really like the new wave that's coming through, but I think it's just funny, and whatever attention you can get on a sport, the better. I wonder what you have to say. I know you might have a little bit of a different opinion on Taylor Swift.
No, it's definitely different to see a coach who's more open with their social media. I mean, nowadays with any sport, seems like all coaches just use it for recruiting purposes or just talking about their program and super professional. But kind of nice to just see him let it rip. And I think it
Yep.
kind of has us thinking, who could the Travis Kelsey Taylor Swift duo be for college baseball? Who's going to take his place for college baseball this year?
Exactly. I mean, last year we kind of saw it in college baseball with Livy Dunn getting all up in the action, seeming like people had new news every other week. But it's got to be Paul Skeens, that dog, who's able to lock it down at least for now. So that was good to see. I mean, obviously he was kind of the top dog last year, and pretty much everything else, even though he didn't win the Golden Spikes, but he's still up there, best pitcher, and was able to be drafted number one. He was just on top of the world, and who knows, maybe a LSU teammate could pull through there with Tommy White. Who knows? He's got that kind of Travis Kelsey vibe. I know you think that, but there's a lot of pop stars or actors or actresses out there that could be in the loop, but I feel like it's a kind of a shot in the barrel. Who knows what's going to come out, and probably nothing. But we like to speculate a little bit here and there. So, yeah, what do you think about it?
Yeah, I'm not too sure how much top tier talent is diving into the college baseball world looking for a suitable partner, but you never know. We'll see if Tommy White can make some noise off the field this year too.
Hey, with NIL money now, you never know what's going to happen, right? Now that they
Yeah,
have at least some of the bigger names in college baseball might have some cash to splash around and at least show off themselves in social media, that kind of thing. But yeah, it is a little funny thinking about that kind of thing, and it's consistently all over the sports world now. So need it to happen a little bit more in college baseball, get that hype up, get people tuning in from all over the place. But we'll see. All right, now that gossip session is over, we can jump in to our top rankings or top rundown of players. We have 5 per position. Outfield, we have 10 just because there are so many outfielders out there, and obviously there's 3 starting per game. So we're going to start things off with starting pitcher and then just run through the rest of the positions. And then, like I mentioned earlier, end things off with our top 10 overall players, regardless of position. And yeah, I guess starting off, number 1, we have Hagen Smith, who is hotly debated. If you watch our previous episode, you can see kind of where our thought process came down on him specifically and a lot of the other top players that we were considering for either player of the year or pitcher of the year, which we had in our predictions there. So you obviously chose Hagen Smith. I was more of a Brody Brett guy, but in this, especially starting pitchers, I think there's just so many really solid options and so many guys that have a ton of potential that could just fly up the charts this year if they just figure everything out. But Hagen Smith in the SEC obviously has that little bit of an advantage there. And yeah, that's why we put him at 1 and Brody Brecht at 2.
Yeah, I think like in the top 6 or 7 starting pitchers in the country, there's really not all that much separation. All these guys are bona fide aces for the most part, and there's just not going to be a whole lot that you're missing from anyone. All of them have big strikeout numbers, good ERAs, and are just solid across the board.
Yeah, and obviously this is all speculation before the season starts. We might do another rankings midway through the year once we have some numbers on everybody, and then we'll finish off the year with our rankings at the end. But yeah, these guys, top dogs, they're going to be Friday night guys for the most part. Might have one guy who has the potential to be that, but has a little bit more iffy on the backside of the top 5 for starting pitchers. But after that, at number 3, we have Josh Hartle. A lot of places have him as potentially the best pitcher in the nation. We have him at 3, just behind the guys we both individually chose for pitcher of the year. So obviously it makes sense to just slot him in there as maybe the best all-around pitcher out there. Just had insane numbers last year at Wake Forest, and obviously with what they have in pitching development there, it's going to be tough to beat a guy that comes back for another year after having a sub-3 ERA.
Yeah, just absolutely dominated last year, was pivotal in Wake Forest's run throughout the playoffs and deep into the College World Series. Had 140 strikeouts last year, which is just by far the most in the country. And yeah, another year of development in that Wake Forest coaching staff and in their pitching lab, and we've seen what that's been able to produce recently. So I think it's definitely something you expect him to get even better in this offseason, which is hard to do considering the numbers he put up last year.
100%. And especially with the other pitchers around him, it's kind of like iron sharpens iron over there now with so many top pitchers. I feel like there's a lot to learn off one on each other and, just really bounce off. And you don't need to be that dominant pitcher to be able to have a great weekend on Wake Forest just because there's amazing pitchers everywhere. So that kind of relieves some stress and a lot of pressure doesn't have to rely on your shoulders there. So yeah, it helps pretty much everyone on the pitching staff there. And then after that, at number 4, we have Trey Yesavage out of East Carolina. Had an amazing year last year. Obviously at mid-major, he can really dominate a lot of those lesser opponents, but he just all over the place, put up insane numbers, and will be looking to do the exact same thing this year.
Yeah, I mean, also put him on the All-American team for best names in the country. Savage is just awesome last name. Not someone you want to be facing if you're up to the bat. But yeah, dominant last year. Like you said, mid-major, but doesn't really matter. One of the best pitchers in the country regardless.
And also Trey is a very baseball name as well. So it's back-to-back. Trey the Savage Yesavage is put that on a shirt, and people will be buying that. But after that, we have maybe a little bit of a surprise, rounding out our top 5 starting pitchers with Chase Burns. I think what we've seen on social media from Wake Forest staff, they've shown that Chase Burns might have it all figured out with putting up insane numbers in practices and scrimmages. But, there is a little bit of, you can't really take those numbers 100%. It is practice. People might not be playing at 100%, and there's a lot less pressure when you're just throwing the ball against your teammates who have seen you 1,000 times. Obviously, it's a little up and down since they have seen him so many times at this point that they probably have a little bit better of a read than a normal opponent, but there definitely is that pressure aspect off of him. But I think he has the potential to rise up, potentially, or even be the number 1 overall pitcher at the end of the year if he can figure it all out and be in a starting role.
Yeah, he doesn't really have the ERA numbers as the rest of these guys from last year, and also didn't start most of his appearances last year either. But I think there's no questioning his talent, and I think the reason we put him up in this top 5 is just faith in the Wake Forest pitching staff and the development of pitchers in that program. We've seen what they've been able to do the last couple of years, and when you put the type of talent Chase Burns has in that system, we just expect him to take a huge step and really get things clicking 100%.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, once he came out of the bullpen at Tennessee, it seemed like he started to figure things out a lot better. So it'll be interesting to see him be a starter again and see if he can kind of revert back to what we've seen previously. But yeah, it's should be very interesting to see this Wake Forest staff. There's probably 3 starting pitchers in the top 10. We won't get into that going deeper down, but just a bunch of insanely talented players all over the place. But staying in pitching, we're going to go to the relief side of things. And number 1, we have Tyson Neighbors. He just showed last year that he's an absolute dog closing out for Kansas State with a 1.85 ERA. So should be able to continue doing that and had insanely good numbers. And you really want a guy like him at the back end of your bullpen and just be able to completely shut every game down.
Yeah, absolutely dominated last season and racked up 11 saves, which is extra impressive when you consider he's playing on Kansas State, who necessarily doesn't have as many wins as a lot of these other top relievers that are on top teams that are winning a lot more games throughout the year. So for him to collect 11 saves and 86 strikeouts on the year is pretty crazy for a reliever as well. I think he was just by far the best reliever in the country considering his all-around performance.
100%. And then at 2 and 3, we go back-to-back Duke players. There was a lot of heated debate between which player should be in that 2 spot, but we eventually agreed on James Talon just because he was the closer last year. And if the Duke coaching staff decides that that's the closer and that's who they want in that position, you kind of got to just take their word for it and say that that's probably the better relief pitcher, at least in the dying embers of the game. And then at 3, we have Fran O'Shell, who had potentially better numbers. I mean, his ERA was under 1, so that's always something to light up the eyes there. But as not being the closer, there is that little additional, no pressure on a guy who knows that James Talon will be there right behind him and able to close out a game. So if he struggles at all, there's that guy that can just jump in and help him out.
Yeah, really hard to differentiate between these two and pick one to go ahead of the other, but both absolutely dominated last year, and it's crazy for one team to have 2 relievers even in the top 5. That's pretty incredible, and so yeah, you don't want to be in a close game or down to Duke late in the game this year.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it was the same thing last year. These guys closed out pretty much every tight game that was there for them, and that's why Duke was able to put together a decent run at the end of the season. But at 4, we have Hudson Barrett for UC Santa Barbara. Had a really good season last year, 82 strikeouts, one of the highest out of all relievers. Had a little bit more walks than maybe you'd necessarily like to see, but overall, really solid reliever there and should be in that closing spot this year and really be able to step up. We had another UCSB pitcher right outside the top 5 for starting pitchers, Matt Agger. So they should really have a dynamic pitching staff with some top relievers and starting pitchers.
Yeah, him with Matt Agger is going to be a nasty duo if you get both of them on a Friday night. And yeah, one of the best relievers in the country, 1.92 ERA last year, under a 200 batting average against. So even with the mid-major status, still just really good numbers. And we've seen in the past that UC Santa Barbara continues to produce really good pitching talent. So I don't think there's any questioning those numbers regardless of who they're playing.
Yep. And then at 5, we decided to stick with Brandon Neely at Florida. His numbers maybe aren't the best. Didn't have too many walks, but his ERA was just over 3.5, which might jump out to people and be like, there's a lot of other relievers out there with a lot better numbers, especially with batting average against an ERA. But as the previous year's closer for Florida, he's in those spots against top SEC teams, top teams all over the nation. So I think that just gives him the edge over some other players with maybe better stats from the previous year. but just having that experience in the SEC really should be able to ramp up to an amazing season this year.
Yeah, I mean, he threw a bunch of innings last year, 55 innings and 34 appearances. So they're obviously very comfortable giving him the ball often, back-to-back nights. Very often. Had 13 saves. Doing that in SEC play is pretty impressive. And like you said, when you have a full year of experience in the closer role on a top team like that, you expect that he'll be more comfortable the next year as well. And he obviously has the talent. So I expect those questionable numbers to certainly improve this year.
Yeah, and I mean, I wouldn't necessarily even say they're questionable. Like, an SEC pitcher with an under 4 ERA is usually looked at as a really amazing pitcher overall, and a guy that will be on draft boards pretty high considering who they're around, maybe have better stats, that kind of thing. But the offenses are just going to be mashing the ball no matter who's up, and home runs all over the place. So after that, we're going to go through our top 5 catchers. Number 1 is Jacob Cozart. Maybe doesn't have the best offensive numbers. Still really solid offensively, but has that defense locked down. Potentially the best defensive catcher out there. At least one that can also hit very well.
Yeah, a bit of a debate here between Cozart and Cole Messina for the number 1 spot, but we just felt like Cozart had that edge defensively. Also has really good numbers offensively for a catcher. Hit over 300 and had double-digit home runs, so no questioning his offensive production either. And yeah, he's on NC State, who was my sleeper team and picked for the national championship as well. So certainly expect him to do good things this year and really produce in that lineup that is dangerous the whole way through.
Yep, and like you mentioned, Cole Messina at that number 2 spot for South Carolina. A little bit better numbers pretty much everywhere. Decent amount more home runs, and has a few stolen bases last year put to his name. So has that dynamic play ability for a catcher. That's something you definitely want to see, and will definitely help with his draft stock. So number 2, Cole Messina, was a pretty easy find.
Yeah, really solid all around, and you put him in that South Carolina lineup, he can't really pitch around him if you have Ethan Petrie around there too. So expect him to put up similar numbers this year, if not improve a little more.
For sure. And then at 3, we have Ethan Anderson out of Virginia. Really good average last year, hitting .375 with 15 home runs. Just overall, very impressive numbers. Had more walks than strikeouts as well. So really solid offensive player at that catcher position, which is usually, not seen as an offensive position.
Yeah, like you said, just complete player behind the plate and complete player up to bat as well. Yeah, super impressive numbers at the plate, hitting .375 as a catcher is outstanding. You don't really see that anywhere else in the country, so super impressive out of him.
Yeah, and then at 4, we have Caden Bodine from Coastal Carolina. Similar average to Ethan Anderson, just a little bit worse in pretty much every area, so definitely was pretty easy to slot him right behind Anderson there.
Yeah, really solid numbers again, and was pivotal in Coastal Carolina's run last year and their dominance throughout the season, and will be again this year as well, for sure.
Yeah, and then at 5, we have Malcolm Moore from Stanford. Only hit .311 last year, which, I mean, is still really good for a catcher. Had 15 home runs. OPS might be a little bit lower than some of those other top catchers out there, but he was a freshman, so I think there's the potential for him to really take a step up here as a draft-eligible sophomore here. So if he can boost up his numbers like a lot of players do coming out of their freshman year, he could be vying for that top catcher spot if he can lock things down.
Yeah, as long as he avoids the sophomore slump, he should be good. Stanford has done an incredible job in all facets of that program recently, but have really done well with player development and produced a lot of top-end talent in the draft, and this will be another one in this upcoming draft.
Yeah, for sure, and it seems like Stanford might have a little bit of a down year, so Malcolm Moore needs to be that guy for Stanford for them to be able to compete at the top of the Pac-12. And then after the catcher position, we'll jump to first base, starting things off with my Player of the Year, Jack Caglione. Obviously, he's somewhat of a utility player, being a starting pitcher as well, but he just missed out on being in that top 5 starting pitching rotation, but he still has those crazy numbers as a hitter, even, better than his pitching stats. Being able to put up 33 home runs last year and 90 RBIs, breaking the record for home runs in the BB Core era. You got to put that guy at least in the top, 1 or 2. And I think just because I have that trump card of having him as the player of the year puts that little edge on the number 1 first baseman.
Yeah, I think it's really, really close between him and Kurtz as who's the best first baseman in the country. But when you add in his ability to produce for you on the pitching staff as well, it gives him that edge for overall value as a player. And so, yeah, like you said, you have the trump card for having him as player of the year as well, but certainly didn't play too much of a factor. He's certainly up there already.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, the thing is with Nick Kurtz is he has pretty much better numbers everywhere else except home runs and RBIs, I guess, but those are kind of hand in hand there. OPS over 1,300 last year is ridiculous, and for this Wake Forest team, they really don't need an offense, but they're going to have one. So it's going to be very scary. They're going to put up crazy numbers and keep their earned runs to a very low level. So there could be a lot of blowouts coming for Wake Forest. Also, another thing to mention for Nick Kurtz, 63 walks to 50 strikeouts last year is a very good ratio, especially just the sheer number of walks he had.
Yeah, like you said, his home run numbers are down from Jack Caglione, but with 9 less home runs, you add 46 walks to his total, and that's a lot less chances to hit the ball out, and he certainly produced at a All-American level.
Yeah, and then after that, at number 3 for first base, we have Charlie Condon. Feel like it's pretty set in stone, these top first basemen. There's just a lot of good options, but Condon is definitely in the mix for one of the best first basemen out there. Insanely good numbers last year, and he'll just be looking to continue that going for Georgia this coming season. Hit 386, and yeah, that's going to be tough to beat, but should be able to put up really good numbers as well.
Yeah, he has really similar numbers to Kurtz, a little higher on the average, but a little down on the OPS, and a couple fewer walks, but he did this as a freshman in the SEC, and that is just crazy impressive. Yeah, expect him to step up if he avoids the sophomore slump as well, but to put up those numbers as a freshman is insanely impressive.
100%. And then at 4, we have Gavin Cash for Texas Tech. Feel like the top 4 was just super easy to pick out for the first baseman. With Cash, he had 26 home runs. All these guys had at least 24 in the top 4. So it's just, pick which ones you like and they'll be there. A little bit down on average than some of the other players like Condon and Kurtz, but really, really solid player. And Texas Tech has been not the best recently. They were a powerhouse for a while, and now they're just kind of up and down. So they're going to need Cash to really step up. I mean, do pretty much exactly the same that he did this year to be able to compete in a very competitive Big 12, even though there might be not as many teams in the top 25 this year.
Yeah, I mean, just putting up 26 home runs in a year is going to make you one of the top players at your position regardless. And yeah, I think actually the Big 12 being a little bit down this year will be to his benefit. He'll probably put up even better numbers than last year, even though that's not necessary. His stat line was incredible last year, and yeah, certainly a good outlook going into this year with a down Big 12.
Yep, and then at 5, we have a little bit of a wild card here with Jeremiah Jenkins out of Maine. Had really, really good numbers last year. Hit 362, 1239 OPS, 21 home runs. And, sometimes you got to give a shout to the little guys, and I feel like Jenkins deserves it, even though he was playing at Maine, obviously. Competition is a little bit lesser there than the SEC, some say. I don't know if I completely agree with them. Maine has some pretty solid opponents that they face week in, week out. But, yeah, definitely, he put up the numbers to be a top 5, top 10 player at first base.
Yeah, I mean, the 1239 OPS, 21 home runs, has a positive walk to K ratio, and at a certain point, the numbers just carry over. And so he's definitely going against lesser competition up in Maine, even if you don't agree with it. But yeah, certainly the numbers carry over, and he's just one of the best first basemen in the country, no doubt.
Yep. And now jumping just over to second base. Feel like the number one slot is pretty obvious with Travis Bazana out of Oregon State. Had pretty much better numbers in most places than any other second baseman out there. Hit 374, 36 stolen bases, had 11 home runs still. So shows that he is a power speed guy, and if he can kind of take just a little step up, he could be a guy who puts up 20 home runs and 50 steals in a season, and you really just can't look past a guy like that. There's maybe one other who might be competing for a spot like that, at least in the major limelight in a Power 4, Power 5 conference. But Travis Bazana is definitely a guy that has the potential to win the Golden Spikes if he can put up crazy numbers.
Yeah, I mean, it's nice for him to have those double digit home runs, and I think he does have the potential to get closer to 20, like you said. But when he has almost 60 walks on the year and has those 36 stolen bases, if you're just getting on base and stealing bases anyway, it doesn't matter how you're doing it. He's just producing. And yeah, we certainly have a high outlook on Oregon State this year, and he's one of the main reasons for that.
Yeah, he's going to wreak havoc no matter what he's doing, either in the box or on the base path. It's just going to be a tough out no matter where he is. But at number 2, another power speed guy, Christian Moore out of Tennessee. Hit 304 last year, but 17 home runs and 16 stolen bases shows he can also do a little bit of everything, and expect him to take another step up for that Tennessee squad.
Yeah, I mean, producing 17 home runs as a second baseman really says something. You don't really expect to see a lot of power out of this position usually, but he's been doing it since he was a freshman at Tennessee. Started in that star-studded lineup when Tennessee really blew up in the media, and yeah, continues to play extremely well and to perform that well in the SEC as a second baseman is very impressive.
Yep. And at 3, we have Sam Kulasingham out of Air Force. Seems like recently Air Force has been able to produce some dogs. Obviously, Paul Skeens a few years ago, and they have a few top players to be mentioned in our rankings here. So Kulasingham had really good numbers, insanely good average, over 400. Doesn't really have the pop necessarily as a Bazana or a Moore, but had 28 doubles, so you can't really look past his. Still able to put himself in really dangerous positions, and 50 walks to 24 strikeouts is very, very good.
Yeah, back-to-back Mountain West Player of the Year, and that really says something, especially coming from, like we said, the second base position, which valuable position, but not normally somewhere you expect for your best player on the team to be. But he certainly is for them, and like you said, Air Force continues to produce really good talent.
Yeah, and then at 4, going back to power speed, we have Jacob Starling out of East Carolina. I guess you could consider them a mid-major, but it seems like they've kind of taken a step up. They're pretty much a Power 5, Power 4 team in a mid-major conference. So East Carolina, really good. Jacob Starling, one of those top guys there. Had 10 home runs, 19 stolen bases. Yeah, and can really show off the bat there.
Yeah, and like you said, mid-major, but East Carolina has continued to excel in the college baseball scene and is regularly playing tough competition in non-conference and in the midweeks against those Carolina schools. Just a lot of good competition in the Carolinas in general. I think they produced like 7 or 8 teams in the tournament last year just from that region alone, which is crazy. And so, yeah, one of the best second basemen in the country, and is doing it on a very competitive team.
Yep, and rounding out our top 5 second basemen, we have Deuce Gorson out of UCLA. His numbers might be a little bit down from the other second baseman, but still really solid player overall. Hit over 300 and had 10 home runs, so just jumped the gap of double-digit home runs there. And I feel like if UCLA is that underdog team that I think they are Deuce Gorson will need to have a massive year, and I think he has the potential to do that.
Yeah, I think UCLA getting a lot of players back healthy this year, getting some transfers as well, helps him not stand out as much in the lineup. Can't really pitch around him. He can hide a little bit more this year, and they're gonna have to pitch to him. So it'll be nice for him to have that help around him, and expect him to have another really productive season.
Yeah. And now going over to third base, the number one third baseman we have is none other than Tommy White from LSU. Hit 377 last year, 24 home runs, broke the 100 RBI barrier with 105. So obviously it helps to have really good players around him like he did last year, but there isn't that much of a drop off from the talent that we should be seeing at LSU, as they're still a top 5 team nationally. So Tommy White will be that leader in the field of play and should be able to put up very good numbers like we saw last year.
Yeah, 24 doubles and 24 home runs. And it just seemed like he continues to produce in the clutch, was pivotal in that postseason run and them winning the national championship. And just seems like whenever you need a solid AB out of him, he's able to produce it.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, he was the guy that beat Wake Forest, so he has that on his shoulders, so he can just ride through with that. And then at 2, we have Billy Amick out of Tennessee, hit over 400, didn't play a full season, but those numbers don't lie. Had 13 home runs still, so he can put up those numbers even in a shortened season for himself. So now that we can see potentially the whole thing in front of him, he should be able to put up some massive numbers, especially in that power category.
Yeah, hitting 413 and 13 home runs, you'd expect that in a full season he's closer to that 20 home run mark, especially in Tennessee's ball field, which often gets referred to as a little league field. The ball just carries there, short fences. So I'm sure he'll be able to put up big numbers this year.
Yeah, for sure. And at 3, we have a mid-major player, Justin Stark out of VMI, hit 387 last year. And what really stands out is he had 32 stolen bases. It might be, a little bit to say about the opposing pitchers kind of letting him get big leads and great jumps and that kind of thing, but 32 stolen bases is still 32 stolen bases, and he had good numbers to really support that with also 13 home runs.
Yeah, I mean, certainly could have had to do with the opposing pitchers in the competition, but at the end of the day, if you're getting 32 steals, you have some really good speed and some good reads, and that's definitely going to carry over across levels. And he has the offensive production outside of that to back up this ranking as well.
Yep, for sure. And then staying at the mid-major level, we have Joey Loin out of Delaware, hitting 392 last year. Didn't have the stolen bases that we saw with Stark, but had one more home run and 80 RBIs. So has potentially a little bit more power, maybe has a little bit more offense around him, able to capitalize on that situation, and just had really solid numbers overall. But I feel like third base, it isn't necessarily as stacked as other position groups were. There are definitely a lot more gaps for mid-major players to jump in and maybe not have the name brand recognition that some of these other positions was just full of, especially like first base and when we're coming through with outfield, that kind of thing. But the mid-major players have the stats to back it up, and Joey Loin is kind of that guy.
Yeah, just really impressive all around. And yeah, hitting 392, like you said, just mid-major. It carries over at a certain point, though. The numbers, they speak for themselves, and 80 RBIs, that's one of the most in the country, and so hard to keep him off the list with some of those numbers.
Yep, and then at 5, we have Carson DeMartini out of Virginia Tech. Really solid numbers overall. Hit over 300, 10 home runs, but obviously it's a little down from other positions, but 9 stolen bases as well shows a little bit of that power-speed combination. And at third base, you usually don't see something like that. Maybe a lot of slower players out there, but he has some sort of speed and able to capitalize, and still a very solid player in the top 5.
Yeah, and also had 46 walks on the season, positive walk to K ratio, and that's really impressive from the third base position, especially when you're still hitting for average and home runs as well. A lot of times third base you kind of think of swing and miss guys that are going strictly for power and extra base hits, but he can really do it all and has good plate discipline.
Yep, for sure. And now rounding out the infield, we have the top five shortstops, starting with the easy pick, JJ Weatherholt, your National Player of the Year. So obviously that just solidifies it even more, but there really just isn't anybody even close to competing with his numbers last year.
Yeah, 450 average, almost a 1300 OPS, and 16 home runs, 35 stolen bases. Has the speed and power. Really, just has everything in his game. And like we said, with a couple of these other guys with the Big 12 looking to have a bit of a down year, I think these offensive numbers may get boosted even more. That's why I picked him for Player of the Year. And since he's over at shortstop as well, just really pivotal position, and I think he's in for a good year.
Yeah, and he's another one of those guys that could have 20 home runs and 50 stolen bases, which is just absolutely ridiculous. Surprising that his walk numbers are somewhat low, 26 walks and only 22 strikeouts. So seems like he's just always making contact. So getting on the base should be something that he should easily be doing, and getting those stolen base numbers back up to where they were last year. At number 2, we have Griff O'Farrell out of Virginia. Almost hit 400, so right behind Weatherholt. More of a contact guy, get on base. Had 16 stolen bases, but only one home run. But really solid overall, and this Virginia offense should be relying pretty heavily on him to be the spark plug and get on base.
Yeah, and we've seen Virginia develop some really good hitters recently with the Geloff brothers, and so you think maybe they'll be able to get him to produce a little more power this year. But regardless of your power numbers, if you're hitting almost 400, you're one of the best players in the country, and he's certainly one of the top guys at this position.
Yep. And then at 3, going back to the Big 12, we have Anthony Silva out of TCU, hit 330, 17 stolen bases, a little bit more home runs than O'Farrell with 7, but obviously his average is a little bit lower. But really solid player overall, should be a very important piece in this really dynamic TCU team.
Yeah, and he's one of the best defenders in the country. We saw it on stage in the College World Series last year. Just had some ridiculous highlights in Omaha. And so expect that again this year. And I think that really just amplifies his offensive production as well and his value overall as a player.
For sure. And then at 4, surprise, surprise, another Florida player, Colby Sheldon. There have been a number of them so far in our rankings. And here's another. Hit under 300, so not many players made a top 5 or top 10 hitting under 300, but had 25 home runs, so that kind of makes up for it. And the OPS shows that with over 1100. So, and also, the average was 299. So, really just missed out on hitting that 300 barrier.
Yeah, I mean the batting average is a bit down, but has the second highest OPS on this list for our shortstops. So definitely made up for it with the power, and doing that in the SEC at Florida, the runner up. I expect him to have another productive season with that ball club and maybe get his average above that 300 mark as well.
Yep. And then at 5, rounding out our top 5 shortstops, we have Kyle DeBarge out of Louisiana. Not LSU, Louisiana. Hit 371 last year with 18 stolen bases and had an even ratio of 21 walks to 21 strikeouts. So really solid overall. Pretty much no flaws in his offensive game. Had a few home runs too with 7. So should be able to make another step up and be a top guy this year.
Yeah, just quality all around numbers, like you said, proven at the D1 level, and yeah, just solid player overall and deserves to be on this list, even though it's right at the end.
Yep, and now jumping into our top 10 outfielders, not top 5, just because there's 3 outfielders on the field at one time. So starting off, number 1, the easy choice there is Ethan Petrie out of South Carolina. Hit 376 last year, 23 home runs. Had 4 stolen bases, so nothing to look past there. he was able to make some havoc on the diamond, but for the most part, yeah, major power guy and an amazing outfielder overall.
Yeah, 23 home runs is super impressive, and it's even more impressive when you take into the consideration he really slumped about the last month or so of the season. I think he was at like 21 home runs with like a month to go. And so, if you think he can put together a full season, avoid the sophomore slump, maybe he got the slump out of the way just in that last month, then he'll be back full power this season. But yeah, one of the best freshman performances we've ever seen in college baseball last year. And yeah, just really high outlook on him this year.
Yeah, he was pacing shot for shot with Jack Caglione in the home run race for a while there, and just like you mentioned, fell off late. But yeah, I mean, I feel like you do see that a decent amount with freshmen just because the college baseball season is a lot longer than they're used to in high school. So there is that drop off that consistently happens at the end of the year if they're playing the full season. But yeah, Ethan Petrie, if he's able to replicate those numbers and kind of follow through with the start of the season he had last year, they could be ridiculous, and we could be seeing another home run record broken for back-to-back-to-back years, which would be very wild to see, and maybe a topic to be discussed internally in the NCAA offices about what should be done about that. But, we'll take the numbers. We love seeing it. But after that, at number 2, we have Jace Laviolette out of Texas A&M. Hit under 300, so very surprising for him to be able to make it this high on the outfield list, but he did have 21 home runs and 20 steals, so just a prototypical power speed guy in the outfield and a very good defender as well.
Yeah, and with that Texas A&M squad last year, nowhere to hide in the lineup. A lot of guys were kind of duds last year, all around that ball club, but we think they really retooled this year, and there's a lot of talent on that squad. So I think he's in for a big season. I think Texas A&M's in for a big season as well.
For sure. And then at 3, we have Cam Canarella out of Clemson. Hit 388 last year, so one of the better averages in the outfield position, and had 24 stolen bases. More of a speed guy than power, but still had 7 home runs to his name. So definitely can get that job done if it really needs to happen.
Yeah, Clemson's been a decent ball club recently, but really blew up on the scene last year, and this guy was a big part of it. Really produced at all facets of the game, like you said. Not as much power as some of these guys, but still has some, and will develop again this year. But yeah, expect him to be a big piece of this team and a big part of their success this year as well.
Definitely. And then at 4 for outfield, we have Mike Serrata out of Northeastern, a team that has really just popped onto the scene recently and is a preseason top 25 team now, which was a surprise to see for a lot of people. I feel like they're a face you don't usually see, but that Northeastern team has some dogs, no pun intended there, that can really fill up the lineup. And Mike Serrata hit almost 350 last year and almost had those 20 home runs and 20 stolen bases with 18 and 19 respectively. So he has those power speed numbers similar to Jace Laviolette and has a lot better average as well.
Yeah, just ultra impressive numbers last year. Was one of the best outfielders in the country, and it's nice to see some of these players like this at colleges like Northeastern stay put, not enter the transfer portal and look for greener grass or look for success. It's nice to see some of them show respect to the program or coaches that recruited them and stick with the program even through their success.
Yep, for sure. And then at 5, going back to Texas A&M, their outfield's going to be stacked. You have Braden Montgomery transferring from Stanford, hit 336 last year, 17 home runs, and has a cannon of an arm. He could be pitching as well, but most likely he'll primarily be a hitter. And I feel like this change doesn't have to focus as much on schools, changing from Stanford to Texas A&M, so might be able to boost up those numbers and focus a lot more on baseball without that the stress of the classroom at Stanford.
Yeah, like you said, we could see a little bit of him on the mound as well, but even if we don't, his arm certainly translates to the outfield. Might have the best arm in the country from the outfield position. Just has an absolute cannon and consistently is saving runs defensively for the team and also producing big numbers offensively. Certainly expect him to do that in the SEC even more so than he did in the Pac-12, being in some warmer weather consistently, some smaller ballparks as well. So I'd expect that home run number to maybe be closer to the 25 mark than 17.
Yeah, he should really be able to benefit from those SEC ballparks. Then at number 6, we have Lawson Harrell out of Campbell. Had an insanely good season last year. I think the best OPS out of the outfielders, which is crazy to think that Ethan Petrie uh, was beaten at that number, but Harrell had 22 home runs, so only one behind Petrie, and had a 1236 OPS. So really good offensive team overall, and should be one of the leaders of the Campbell squad.
Yeah, and this another school in Campbell, mid-major, but in those Carolinas, one of those teams we said made the tournament, and just regularly scheduling tough competition in that area, and these numbers have certainly translated across all levels. And like you said, having the highest OPS out of all outfielders is impressive, no matter what school you're at.
Yep. And then at 7, we have Nolan Schubert out of Oklahoma State. This Oklahoma State might be a little down this year. They were projected to be a really good team last year, and we're pretty solid overall. But for them to be able to compete at the level they want to be at, Nolan Schubert really has to maybe elevate his game a little bit more. He still had over 300 batting average and 17 home runs, but the competition is tough at the top of the outfield list with a lot of guys over 20 home runs and putting up crazy power numbers. So he needs to be able to replicate that and be able to maybe tick it up a little bit more to be able to help this Oklahoma State team compete for the Big 12 championship.
Yeah, certainly things to improve on to up that Oklahoma State squad, but he also had second most RBIs on this list out of players in the Power 5 conferences, and so certainly produced at a very high level, and expect him to do it again this year. And I think it's another case of what I've said multiple times with the Big 12 being down this year, especially on the pitching side. I think that he'll be another player that benefits from that.
Yep. And then at 8, we have James Tibbs for Florida State. Even though this Florida State team really fell apart last year, the one and maybe one of the only bright spots there was for this team was still James Tibbs. Had 17 home runs, hit over 300, had an over 1100 OPS. So just very, very solid overall. Had a pretty good walk to strikeout ratio as well with 48 and 49 respectively. So really solid overall, and if that Florida State team can figure something out there, he should get a lot of help and be able to boost those numbers.
Yeah, tough year for that program. First year missing the postseason since 1977, I think it was. So insane stretch they were on of consistently making the tournament, and sad to see that come to an end. But nice to see some new faces in the tournament as well. And if they want to turn this the program back in the right direction, this guy's going to be a big part of it.
Yep, for sure. And then our last 2 outfielders on the list maybe have more question marks than the others, but have potential to be some of the best outfielders, maybe the best out there. Starting off with Seaver King for Wake Forest. This offense should be really good, and Seaver King should be one of the names at the top of the list there. He is a D2 transfer, but his numbers there were ridiculous, and even though it's D2, there still is pretty decent competition pretty much anywhere in college baseball that you look. There's always going to be good players that were looked past, and Seaver King is a guy that should be really able to capitalize on this Wake Forest team that's just dominated by pitching.
Yeah, and I think we've seen in the past that, I think the group of 5 or the non-Power 5 talent as well as D2 talent really transfers over in college baseball more so than it does in basketball and football. A lot of these top guys just across the country at all levels are top guys no matter where they go. And, at a certain point it carries over, and it's pretty consensus that Seaver King is going to carry over and produce really well at Wake Forest this year.
Yeah, and then rounding out our top 10 outfielders is none other than Vance Honeycutt. Maybe has the most potential out there. We saw what he can do his freshman year, but had a absolute dud of a season last year for North Carolina, hitting .257, where you really expect him to just absolutely go off. Still had 19 stolen bases, so when he got on base, he was able to capitalize a decent amount, and 12 home runs, which is a lot less than he had his freshman year. So he's shown that he has the ability to be a 2020 guy, like some of the best in the outfield, but he just had a terrible year last year. Still really good defensively, but offensively kind of fell apart.
Yeah, he was the epitome of a sophomore slump last year. Just never could really figure it out. Like you said, one of the best outfielders defensively in the country, and still has one of the highest ceilings out of everybody. That's why we put him on the list. Nobody else on the list had a 257 batting average last year, but still put him on there out of respect for what he did his freshman season and for the potential that's there. But certainly says something that he's also like 6th or 7th in the Golden Spikes Award favorite list, but all the way down at 10 just in the outfielder list alone for us. But it varies.
Yeah, I mean, he has the name recognition for what he did his freshman year, and obviously he was a really high recruit coming in, so everything should be looking up if he can figure things out. But that's it for rounding out the player rankings, individual position player rankings. Now we're going to jump into our top 10 overall player rankings with out position really looked into, starting things off with the guy who does multiple things. My player of the year, Jack Caglione, just an absolute animal. We've talked about it enough, and if he can really figure out his pitching, then it should be an easy win in the Golden Spikes if he can put up similar numbers offensively.
Yeah, hard to question anything about him, and like you said, he does it on both ends. Your player of the year, and we'll follow up the number 2 spot with my player of the year, JJ Weatherholt, another absolute stud, and so yeah, got our players of the years back to back here.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think we really need to put that much thought behind our top 10 list here since we've already gone through each individual player. But at that number 3 spot, we have Nick Kurtz, really potentially vying to be the best first baseman out there. So, there isn't that much of a gap offensively, at least between him and Caglione. Maybe Kurtz is even better, but we'll have to see how things play out. We can just run through now. A few pitchers coming up after that. At 4 and 5, we have Hagen Smith and Brody Breck, both of our pitcher of the years. You had Hagen Smith, I had Brody Breck. Anything you want to say about them?
No, just absolute dogs and going to be 2 of the best pitchers in the country. And so, yeah, 4 of our top 5 here are picks for players of the years at their respective roles.
Yep, and then after that, we have Travis Bazzana, similar player to JJ Weatherholt, just had stats a little bit less in pretty much everything. And then following that up, we have Ethan Petrie, our best outfielder, showing up on the list. Then we got Josh Hartle at 8. Just this Wake Forest pitching staff will be tough to beat, and he might not even be the best pitcher by the end of the year. We'll have to see. But they have 3 guys vying for that Friday spot, so it really should shake things up if anybody has a little bit of a letdown there. We really could see a lot of movement around how their lineup works.
Yep, and then follow it up in number 9, we got Trey Savage. Like we said, could be the name of the year, but also could be the pitcher of the year at East Carolina. And also rounding it out with Tommy White in the 10 spot. Can't leave him off the list after what he did last year.
Yeah, he had all the glory last year, so really deserves to make the top 10. There are a few other players that got left out that are absolute dogs, but I feel like this top 10 list kind of shows the main names that you would expect. I feel like there is somewhat of a drop-off after this top 10. It seemed pretty easy for me to decide the team or the names to make it maybe a different order, but these top 10 players seem like pretty solid guarantees that they'll be some of the best players this year heading into the season.
Yeah, and I think it says a lot to have 4 starting pitchers on this list as well. Just really shows the value of having an absolute lockdown Friday guy on your team in college baseball. Just makes all the difference and really propels teams from being mediocre to top 25 or even one of the best teams in the country.
Yep, 100%. So I guess that's it for this podcast. We got through all the positional rankings as well as the overall top 10 for where we think the preseason players should really end up, and hopefully we get a decent number of these in good spots, and hopefully nobody has surprise terrible years like we saw last year with Honeycutt. But for things coming up next week, we'll be getting into regularly scheduled program of going through what's going on that week of college baseball, since the season is right around the corner, just a few days away at this point. When you're watching, it might have already started, but yeah, super excited about what's coming forth. We'll have another video coming up shortly about our predictions for our weekend series, which there were very few to choose from, at least good ones, since there are so many round robin style tournaments set up this weekend. But after this, there will be really solid series every week. So watch out for that video, and yeah, see you next time.